Take a seat here in this chair. It's the special chair. No, I'm fine right here. Thanks anyway. I insist. This chair is reserved for guests. I insist you sit in it. Well, only if you're sure. I am. Why don't you chat to my daughter Kate whilst I go and prepare some food? Welcome to the Extraordinary Stories podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay, let's get to the shout outs and then on with the episode. Shout out to Beck Allen at the Minds of Madness podcast. Hello. Also shout out to Tashia Banks and to Katie McGrew. Thanks all very much for getting in touch and for the things that you've been doing and saying on Facebook. One more thing just to mention just before I start the episode is that in the next couple of weeks, I am going to be starting some merchandise that I've got for Extraordinary Stories podcast. And I'm going to be doing a bit of a giveaway on the Facebook group. I'll tell you more about it when I'm ready to do it, but just in a couple of weeks' time, there'll be some stuff that I'll be offering up to people who are in the group on Facebook. Okay, this episode, we are talking about families. Dysfunctional, crazy, and off the scale nuts. For the first story, I'm going to go back a little bit in time. Now we're going back to 1871. Normally, I wouldn't really go back to a story that was that long ago. And I'll tell you why. It's because sometimes I find it hard to find the connection for myself with some of those stories. And then I find it tricky to find a way to connect it to people who might be listening to it. But this one, I think you'll really like it. It's so crazy and it's been documented really accurately. So not too much of it has got lost in the sort of folklore and the myth around it. So like I said, it's 1871, but when it was happening, police were very aware that they were dealing with something absolutely huge that they hadn't seen before, that it needed to be documented very, very precisely. And that's why I'd like to tell you this story. Okay, let's go. I bring you the bloody Benders. Ah, the Bender family. What a surname. Okay, before we start that, Bender has lots of different, colloquial meanings. You know, I think we'll all know Bender as in went on a bender, went for a mad one, went out, drank an awful lot, or did whatever, partied too hard, so we know that one. I believe there's also a sporting term to do with ice hockey. It's to do with the way that someone's foot bends, so you'd say, oh, that ice hockey player, he's such a bender. In the UK, bender means something else entirely. It's quite a derogatory way to refer to a gay man, so you'd say, oh, you're a bender. Anyway, so those are just some of the things that are associated with that name. But this was the surname of the Benders, and they were a German family. Okay, who made up this family? Well, there was husband and father John Bender, wife and mother Elvira, John Jr., their son, and Kate, their daughter. So John, Elvira, John Jr., and Kate. Where did they live? They lived in Kansas, USA, in a place called Labette County. So the story takes place not long after the American Civil War. And with so many families displaced by the war, it was time for families to find a new place to live and a new community to be a part of. So they moved to Labette County and they set up home in a newly built cabin. John and John Jr., they would go on ahead and they would secure the cabin and the land around it. And they would set it all up. And then wife Elvira and daughter Kate, they would join them a little bit later. And the four of them would then begin to make this their home. A humble, modest little cabin, although not tiny, I have to say, not a tiny cabin. it had enough room for the four of them and a little bit extra. They divided it into 2 rooms. So at the back of the space, there was a room curtained off which they used for their living quarters. And it had a dining table and it had a kitchen. And from that dining table, they would sell some goods to local neighbours or people passing by as a way to make some money. When Elvira had arrived at the cabin, she had encouraged her family to help her plant a few acres of vegetable gardens and an apple orchard. So I think she was looking ahead for things that they would one day be able to sell out of their cabin. It was reported that Elvira and John didn't speak much English. They spoke mainly German, but the 2 kids, John Jr. and Kate, they were fluent in both English and German. So as well as selling things out of their cabin, they would also open up their home to passers-by who might need somewhere to stay of an evening. And this helped them again just bring in a little extra money. A sort of bed and breakfast, shop, home type affair was what they had going on. John and Elvira were not liked by the neighbours. Oh no. They weren't liked by the neighbours or the community in general. It was said that Elvira was rude, she was dismissive, and even a little bit menacing towards her neighbours. They gave her the nickname, love this, She-Devil. That was her nickname around the town. Sounds like a bad 80s villain. Now, Kate the daughter, she was a self-proclaimed healer and psychic. Neighbours would call upon her to read their fortunes. Self-proclaimed, you say. Interesting. Aren't they all? Isn't every psychic and every healer self-proclaimed? Don't they all say, I'm psychic, I can heal you? I mean, am I just being stupid? Surely they're all self-proclaimed. Okay, so John, the son, he was popular in the neighbourhood. He was popular with the girls because he'd grown into quite a handsome young man. So at the point where this story really takes place for the Benders, Kate and John, they're both in their early 20s. And I think at this point, John Bender was in his 60s and Elvira possibly late 40s. So they've got their little cabin. They're offering out their room. And so between the shop, people coming to stay for the night, and daughter Kate's psychic seances, it was bringing them in a not bad income. And it was bringing them no shortage of people who were passing by their cabin. Now, as much as they were regarded as a little bit of an odd family, Elvira was a she-devil, neighbours didn't like her, no one really considered them to be particularly dangerous. Well, they should have considered again. Around 1872, roughly a year after they moved to this cabin, there began to be a series of disappearances near where the Benders lived. So much so that word spread. It spread for miles around that people were vanishing into thin air and fewer people were passing by where they lived as previously. Where their cabin was in Kansas, if you wanted to cross from one part of Kansas into the next bit of it, you would walk along this long path, this long trail. You'd pass many cabins along the way. The Benders just happened to, just to be one of those cabins. But it was that trail, that long path started to quieten down when people started saying, so-and-so was going from this part of Kansas to that part of Kansas, never made it, disappeared. So that path started to become a little bit emptier. Around this time, a man named George Longcore was travelling with his baby daughter, travelling through Kansas, and he needed somewhere to sleep with his child for the evening. So George and his baby found somewhere to sleep for the evening, and the next day they were due to arrive in Kansas, but they never showed up. So George had a good friend and neighbour, a doctor named Mr. William York. So when Dr. William York heard that his friend and his baby daughter had never arrived in the place that they were supposed to, he thinks, okay, I'm going to go looking for him. I know the way he was travelling that particular road, that particular path. I'll go and check. I'll go and see if I can find him. So off Dr. William goes. Dr. William vanishes. So the doctor, he has a brother named Ed. So now Ed gets involved. He thinks, this is really strange. My brother went looking for his friend who had vanished. He in turn vanishes. So I'll tell you what, I'll go looking for him. I'll go looking for them both. I'll just go down there and I'll see what I can sort out. At that point, I'd be thinking, stay away from that path. Clearly, people keep going down it and people keep vanishing. Get away from that path. But anyway, off he goes. So he arrives at the Bender's house as he's walking along the path. And he says to them, have you seen either George and his baby, or have you seen my brother? And they say, yes, we have seen your brother. He stayed here only a few nights ago, but then he left. So Ed is thinking, where in the hell has my brother gone? Now, he's a smart man, Ed, and he's suspicious. He thinks something's wrong, so he decides he's going to stay in the town for a few more days and ask just a few more questions. He decides to set up a community meeting, and it's attended by around 100 people. And they're all worried about the disappearances that are happening. And at that meeting, there's John Bender Sr. and John Bender Jr. So they're hearing this. They're hearing that the whole entire town is very concerned by these disappearances. Ed says in this meeting, I'm planning to do a search of every home in the area, and I've enlisted 50 people who will help me in that search. So the following day, the search begins. But when they get to the Bender's house, what do they discover? The house is empty, completely abandoned. The Bender family, nowhere to be seen. Where are they? Where have they gone? Now this comes directly, this next bit, from a statement written down by a member of the search party. We went into the Bender's house and it was eerily quiet. No one was around and there were plenty of tasks left unfinished. Belongings were scattered all over the house. They were gone. We walked through the property into the dining area at the back. Near the dining table, where the family ate and guests were served, we saw a trapdoor and a foul-smelling hole beneath the trapdoor, which was clotted with blood. Some of us looked in there and others went outside to search. We began to search around the cabin and in an orchard, that'll be the one Elvira wanted planted. We began to search the orchard near the house, and it had been carefully ploughed, but one small section was noticeably indented. The ground was dug up, revealing the decomposed body of Dr. William York. His skull had been crushed and his throat had been cut. The party set to work searching the fields and the orchards all around. That'll be the orchards that Elvira wanted. And among the trees they find 11 mounds of oddly shaped earth. They begin to dig and they tragically begin to find bodies. More graves were found by walking around the edge of the prairie and walking a good couple of miles away from where the Bender's cabin was. Here and there they would strike a soft place, and in every instance that they did, a soft bit in the ground usually meant that a body was to be discovered. More than 24 bodies were found, but how many went undiscovered, no one knows. Oh, horrible, horrible. The victims that they found included 2 children, including an infant. They discovered that the infant, this is horrible, I'm just warning you. When they performed an autopsy on the infant, they realised the infant had been buried alive. So what are the police looking at? A family of killers? Well, here's the thing. The Benders actually weren't a family. The whole thing was a lie. John and Elvira were in fact brother and sister. Their daughter Kate was not their daughter. She was instead a niece of Elvira. And as for John Jr., no relation at all. John Sr. had found John Jr. as a baby during the Civil War and had taken him back to his sister Elvira. They raised John without him ever knowing he wasn't their son. Oh, it's just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy that they were brother and sister, and one was a niece, and one was just not even a fucking relation of theirs. Oh, so what's the deal then? I mean, it's one of two things. Either the Benders were hell-bent on robbing everybody that they could for every penny they could find, or they just actually liked to kill. Here's how the killings would go. When a guest would stay at the Benders' bed and breakfast, the hosts would give the guest a seat of honour at the top of the table, which was positioned over a trapdoor, and that trapdoor led into the cellar. Kate was responsible for distracting the guest, while John Bender, Sr., or his son, would come from behind and he would strike the guest across the head with a hammer. Ugh. The victim's throat would then be cut by either one of the women. Either Kate or Elvira would take a knife and cut their throat. Once dead, the body was then dropped through the trapdoor and into the cellar. Once it was down in the cellar, they would strip it for everything that they could get off of it. Any jewellery, any money, anything that they could find. And then later, they would take the body and they would bury it in the orchard. I mean, although some of the victims that they had were quite wealthy, others had been carrying very little money. And being a family who had plenty of people coming through their cabin and staying, they must have been able to separate those who had money from those who didn't. So this is why I guess people believe the idea that actually in lots of cases they possibly just killed for fun. They possibly just killed because that's what they quite like to do. Sick bastards. A whole family. I mean, I know they're not really a family, but they are for all intent and purposes. A whole family involved in it. Sick and wrong. Sick and fucking wrong. But with the Benders having upped and vanished and disappeared, how is it possible at all for police to know that this was their method? Well, it's because plenty of people managed to actually escape this exact incident that I'm describing. Plenty of people managed to escape it. A man interviewed by police, he gave the description of being forced to sit in the seat above the trapdoor, and that John in fact came at him with the hammer, but that he managed to escape. He managed to wrestle with John and escape. William Pickering, who was another guest, said that he had refused to sit on the special chair. And when he was really insistent in his refusal, Kate produced a knife and tried to force him to sit down on the seat above the trapdoor. Whereupon he did what any normal human being would do. He got the fuck out of there. He ran. He just got to. There were more than a dozen bullet holes found in the roof and the sides of the cabin, so this just created speculation in police and in the media that this was victims fighting back. People who had guns were trying to get away from them, and that's why there was gunshots. So immediately a search for the Benders began, and this throws up slight problems because there were lots and lots of vigilante groups who wanted to be the group that found the Bender family and were responsible for getting them to the police. And there's 3 different groups, have all got a very different story of how they say they found the family and they killed them. One group say that they shot them and they threw them in a river. Another group says that they burned the family alive. And another group says that they buried them alive. I mean, which of these are true? No one knows. But what we do know is that the Bender family are considered one of the most murderous families to ever exist. And so ends the story of the Bender family. Woo! I know, it's nuts. I suppose the bigger story for me is the fact that it is a family. This story and the one I'm going to tell you next, they're both examples of when a group of people who live closely all play a part in something horrific. And it makes me think about, how does that come to be? Is it brainwashing of the children? Is it brainwashing of each other? Is it just that it becomes something that they tell themselves they have to do? I mean, I can be really, and I am really, really interested in the solo killer. You know, the solo serial killer. The man who kills because, he can't get it up and he blames women. The woman who kills because she's been wronged by a man. But when a close group of people who make up a family all participate in something, I just want to know why. Are we slightly wandering into cultish areas? Charlie Manson, that whole family. Yeah. I think it's one of those things I like to not necessarily have an answer to. I just like to keep letting that kind of just work away somewhere in my brain. As always, any thoughts you've got on this, totally welcome. Please let me know. What makes an entire family act in a cruel and murderous way? Okay, story number 2. It's very peculiar, it's very unsettling, and it contains a few really distressing elements, so I'm just warning you now. Okay, so it's 1998 and we are in northern France. Police visit the family home of the Lefrancs. I think that's how you say it. That's how I would say it. I'm just going to say Lefrancs from now on. So, the Lefrancs consist of mother Lucy, husband Paul, their 2 sons Didier and Patrick, and their daughter Patricia. So why were police visiting this family home in the north of France? Well, it's because a doctor who had recently treated the elderly Mr. Lefranc was suspicious about some marks that he had on his body. Mr. Lefranc, at the time when police visited, he was 67 years old. His wife was of a similar age, and their children were all grown up. They were all in their 20s, and they all lived under the one roof. The Lefranc family were known in the area for being a drunken family, often getting into arguments in the street, and for just general disruptive behaviour. I mean, you know the kind of family I'm talking about. The matriarch, the woman in charge, was Lucy, nicknamed by locals as Fat Lucy. She was extremely, extremely overweight. The other nickname for her was, this is awful, Piss Standing, because she basically smelt of urine so badly that if she went into a shop, customers would leave. They would actually just have to leave because the smell was so horrific. And when this began to happen and she was banned from shops, her daughter Patricia was sent in her place. So Fat Lucy, she used a wheelchair to get around, and it was her family that would push her around in this. So I don't think it was one of those like motorised ones. I think it was like an actual push one. I hate those motorised ones. I mean, they're obviously really, really good if you need them. But I will say this, people say they're harmless. Are they? Fuck? I nearly got ran over the other day on the way to the train station by an old man, clearly in a rush. Anyway. So police investigate the mark on Paul Lefranc's body, and they discover them to be dog bites. And the family owned a vicious dog. So Mr. Lefranc is taken to the hospital and he's treated, and police, they want to ask the family, where are these dog bites coming from? Why is his health in such a bad place? So they sit down, they ask them, it's just a general well-being conversation. They just want to check what's going on in the Lefranc house. And it's during this fairly broad conversation that daughter Patricia lets something slip. She says she's lost count of how many babies she's lost in the past few years. What now? Okay, so police want to know more about this statement. They want to know, what is Patricia talking about? But in this conversation, they don't really get anywhere. They don't really get much else from her. So they start, as part of their well-being check, they start to look around the house and the garden. And in the garden they see a rabbit hutch. Now at first it just looks like a normal hutch, until they get a bit closer and they realise that it has been modified. It's been modified to allow something bigger than a rabbit to fit into it. They question this. They ask the family, what is this? What is this rabbit hutch you've got here? And it comes to light that the family were forcing the elderly Mr. Lefranc to sleep in the rabbit hutch. And in case you're thinking I'm talking like a small rabbit hutch, I'm not. It's way bigger than that. But it's still a rabbit hutch. It still has that metal mesh on it, and it's a fairly poorly constructed thing. So while he slept, and while the family forced him to sleep in this hutch, it was guarded by the family dog. And what they had done, this bunch of fucking dickheads, they had trained the dog to treat the old man as a trespasser, and they encouraged the dog to often attack him. So they imprisoned him in the hutch, and the attacks by the dogs were facilitated by all of the members of the family, his wife and his children. Now once they discovered this, and Mr. Lefranc was open in telling them that this is what had happened to him and he wanted away from them, police went back and they said, right, we want the rest of the story. We know now what you've done to your husband, father. We now know about this. We want more about Patricia and her comment about losing count of the amount of babies that she's had. It comes out in the wash that the two brothers had been systematically raping their sister for years, since she was young. And during this time, she had continued to fall pregnant. Now, when she fell pregnant, she would give birth and the babies would be taken away. She would never see them again. So when the babies were taken away, where were they taken? The brothers were questioned, as they were the ones who were actually taking them away. They were questioned, where did the babies go? And they couldn't really come up with an answer. This led police to believe that actually the babies had possibly been killed by the brothers. So all of this, the husband in the hutch, the rape, the birth, the possible murder of the babies, was all being overseen by Lucy Lefranc. She ruled every move in the family. I mean, what do you even say about this? Where do you even start with the madness that is this story? Patricia told police that she thought she'd given birth 3 times, but she couldn't be sure. It could be more. So a huge investigation by French police begins, and the house is sealed off while the bodies of these babies are searched for. Mr. Lefranc was taken and he was placed in a secure home miles away from his crazy, fucked up family. Thank God. The remaining members of the Lefranc family were arrested for the cruelty that they had placed upon Paul Lefranc, and the brothers were arrested for rape, with one of them being charged for murder. So, somewhere during this investigation, one of the brothers broke down and admitted that yes, he had in fact killed babies that Patricia had given birth to. The mother, Fat Lucy, she was charged with failing to report major crimes and, for her part, in the facilitation of rape and murder. So Fat Lucy was actually freed. Her charge wasn't long enough. It wasn't serious enough for her to go to prison for any substantial length of time. She spent a little time in prison, but it wasn't much. Every other member of that family, they went to prison for 20 years. The father, Paul, he recovered well, and he lived the rest of his life happily, and he never saw his family ever again. And so ends the story of the Lefranc family. I mean, horrible. Just horrific. Just utterly horrific. To go back to what I was saying just before I started this story, what is that? What is that weird family thing that's going on? What is that power that the mother held over them that made those 3 children put their father in a rabbit hutch? So, I mean, they all interest me. Every single person in this story interests me. But I suppose Patricia, the daughter, she really interests me. She's putting up with years of systematic rape. She's giving birth and her babies are being taken away. But she is acting horrifically towards her own father as well. There's just so many things in there that are just really wrong. Okay, on to something a little bit more uplifting. Extraordinary person of the episode. So it's very short. It's a crazy survival rescue story again. I love those. I fucking love them. So in May 1988, a freight train conductor Robert Moore and engineer Rodney Lunday were on a train moving through Indiana when they see on the tracks ahead of them what appears to be a puppy. So they blow the alarm whistle, the train keeps moving, and they realise that's not a puppy on the tracks. In fact, it's a child. A child has wandered onto the railway line. 19-month-old Emily Marshall had wandered away from her mum, who was gardening in the front yard, and she was now sitting on these railroad tracks 50 metres away from her mother. Her mother hadn't noticed she was gone at all. So Emily is sitting on the tracks and there is a 6,000-ton train coming at her. She is completely unaware of the danger. So Mr. Moore and Mr. Lindley, they pull the brakes. They slow the train from 39 kilometres an hour to 16 kilometres an hour, but it's not enough. That train will not stop in enough time to not hit Emily on the tracks. So, Mr. Moore, he runs out onto the wee catwalk next to the engine. Do you know on a freight train you get that little it's like a little walkway at the side that you can stand on. So he runs out and he's on that little walkway and he basically sort of almost monkey-like, he wraps his legs around something that he can get his legs around. He wraps his arm around a really big, strong, hefty bit of the train and he puts his other arm out thinking, I can grab her with this arm. So they're moving towards her. Now at the last minute, Emily moves just slightly off the rails, but she's still close enough that if the train hits her, it will kill her. So he realises he's not necessarily going to be able to grab her at this point. So what he does is he quickly turns his body around, puts his legs out towards the back, and in desperation he swings his leg out and he kicks her down an embankment. So as soon as he's done this, he leaps off of the train, he rolls down the embankment, he goes and he finds her, and actually all that's happened is she's got a chipped tooth and she gets a couple of stitches in her head. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. The quick thinking that man must have had to have done when he realised, shit, I am not going to be able to grab her. What am I going to do in this moment? And I know it sounds terrible saying he kicked her down an embankment, but my fuck, it saved her life. So Moore and Lindley, they were given awards for their bravery and their quick thinking. Good on those men. Okay, that about ends this episode. As usual, you can get me on all of the social medias. I'm on Twitter, Instagram. There's a Facebook group. If you haven't headed over there already, get yourself involved. Keep an eye out for the free merchandise that I'm going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks. Also, I'm on Patreon if you would like to support me. If you do already support me, thanks very much. Until next time, my friends, as I always... Oh, no, I shouldn't be saying friends, I should be saying extras. That's what was decided on the Facebook group that we would be called. Okay, so I'll start again. Until next time, extras. I quite like that. I like the sound of that. I think that sounds nice. As I always say, if you know a great story, an extraordinary story, let me know. Okay? Goodbye.
it didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.